Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you lost pieces of yourself just trying to hold them together? That kind of love doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks in slowly, disguised as purpose, wrapped in chemistry, cloaked in charm. It starts with a glance, her eyes full of wonder, her spirit light, her laughter intoxicating. You feel needed, seen, perhaps even heroic. But what you don't realize in that moment is that she's not meeting you as an equal. She's handing you a role to rescue, to stabilize, to carry. At first, it feels good. It feels right. You tell yourself, this is love. You write her chaos off as creativity, her indecision as innocence, her emotional spirals as vulnerability. And you believe deep down that if you just love her hard enough, long enough, she'll become the woman you envision. But years pass. Your shoulders grow heavy. Your voice gets quieter. Your clarity dims. And still, she spins, she avoids, she charms, and you chase. Not because you're weak, but because no one ever warned you some women don't want to grow up. Carl Jung had a name for her, Puella Eterna, the eternal girl. And if you've ever been in her orbit, this video may be the first time anyone's ever helped you make sense of what really happened. People will do anything, and I mean anything, to avoid facing the mirror of their own soul. We build entire lives around distractions. We scroll for hours, binge through noise-chase success, and pour ourselves into relationships, hoping that if we stay busy enough, we won't have to feel the quiet ache underneath it all. Carl Jung saw this long before the digital age, warning us that the greatest threat to our sanity isn't the outside world, but the unexamined world within us. You see, most people aren't afraid of suffering. They're afraid of confronting the source of that suffering, the unresolved fears, the unmet needs, the traumas buried beneath polished identities. And so, we run not with our feet, but with our choices. We choose comfort over clarity, fantasy over truth. And worst of all, we mistake numbness for peace. This avoidance doesn't just damage us individually, it poisons our relationships. Because when you haven't faced your own darkness, you unconsciously demand others carry it for you. That's how cycles are born. That's how love turns into rescue missions. That's how men and women get stuck in roles that were never theirs to play. Facing your soul is brutal, but not facing it, that's a slow death in disguise. This is where the story begins. Not with her, not with them, but with you and the truth you've been taught to avoid. We've been conditioned to believe that physical age and psychological maturity are one and the same. That a woman who looks grown, who dresses like an adult, who works, who dates, must be emotionally evolved. But the truth is far more unsettling. Many women never actually grow up, not emotionally, not psychologically. And this isn't a criticism, it's a reality. One that Carl Jung tried to expose long before the world was willing to hear it. She may be 30. She may be successful. She may carry herself with confidence. But beneath the surface, there's still a girl untouched by the painful transformation that real growth requires. A girl who never learned to self-soothe, to regulate her emotions, to take ownership of her inner world. Instead, she developed charm. She mastered the art of being adored. She learned how to attract support without ever learning how to stand alone. And if you're a man, especially one trained to protect, to provide, to be dependable, you likely stepped into her life believing you were needed for something noble. You didn't see the truth at first. You saw softness and thought it was depth. You saw emotion and mistook it for connection. But what you were really witnessing was a woman performing adulthood, not living it. Emotional maturity is not about age. It's about integration. It's about standing face to face with discomfort and choosing growth over escape. Without it, love becomes dependency. And men become emotional crutches for women who never learned to walk on their own. She isn't evil. She isn't malicious. But she is lost, trapped in a psychological state that Carl Jung called the puella eterna, the eternal girl. She lives not in the world as it is, but in the world as she wishes it would be, effortless, magical, responsibility-free. At first, this might feel enchanting. She seems light-hearted, spontaneous, full of wonder. But beneath the surface lies a refusal to grow, not in body, but in soul. The puella isn't just young at heart, she's frozen in time. Her dreams are grand but rootless. Her emotions are intense but unanchored. When life demands stability, she flees to fantasy. When love demands reciprocity, she retreats into dependence. You might find yourself drawn in by her sparkle, her passion, her unpredictability, until you realize you're not in a partnership, but in a performance. She doesn't build. She dances around the edges of life, charming others into doing the hard parts for her. She avoids structure, dreads consequences, and collapses at the first sign of resistance. You try to help. You think love will lift her. But you can't carry someone who won't walk. The puella eterna archetype is not a phase, it's a psychological posture. And if you don't recognize it, you'll mistake her resistance to maturity as something you're supposed to fix. But you're not her therapist. You're not her father. You're not her savior. And you were never meant to be. At first you thought you were being strong. You thought that being the steady one, the calm one, the reliable one made you a better man. After all, isn't that what love demands? To hold space when she breaks down, to carry her when she can't stand to solve what she refuses to face. But over time, something began to shift. The weight got heavier. Not just on your back, but in your soul. You weren't just loving her, you were holding her together. You weren't just supporting her, you were losing yourself in the process. This is what happens when a man enters a relationship with a puella eterna. He doesn't find a partner, he finds a project. Her emotional chaos becomes his daily weather. Her wounds become his responsibility. And every time he tries to set a boundary, he's met with tears, withdrawal, or accusations. So he bends. He compromises. He makes himself smaller just to keep the peace. But peace bought through self-erasure isn't peace, it's captivity. And it breeds resentment. Because deep down he knows he's become her emotional parent, not her lover. He's not being met, he's being leaned on. And while the world might call that noble, Jung would call it tragic, a man built to lead has now been reduced to a crutch for someone who refuses to grow. And if he stays too long, he begins to forget who he was before the rescue mission began. No one warned you. Not your father, not your teachers, not even the so-called relationship gurus flooding your social media feed. They taught you tactics, how to be more attractive, how to text, right? How to keep her interested, but they never taught you the truth. They never told you that behind the prettiest faces and most intoxicating energy, there could be a woman psychologically stuck in girlhood, incapable of carrying emotional weight and unwilling to grow up. And it's not entirely her fault. Our culture rewards the puella eterna. From Disney movies to influencer reels, she's celebrated for being light, carefree, impulsive, and perpetually adored. She's praised for her beauty, not her depth, encouraged to be desirable but never accountable, protected from discomfort but never taught how to wield emotional responsibility. Meanwhile, boys are taught to become men, to protect, to build, to provide. But they're never given a map for navigating women who've mastered the art of performance without doing the inner work. So men step blindly into roles that drain them, confuse them, and hollow them out, believing that's just part of being a man. But Carl Jung didn't see it that way. He saw a pattern, and he gave us language for it. The puella eterna is not a phase. It's not just how women are. It's a psychological structure, and when left unrecognized, it destroys men quietly from the inside out. You weren't just misled. You were set up to suffer in silence. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with the idea of her, the potential, the mystery, the way her vulnerability made you feel strong, needed, important. But what you didn't realize was that you weren't seeing her clearly at all. You were projecting. As Jung warned, projection is what happens when we unconsciously assign our own traits, longings, and unhealed wounds onto another person, not seeing who they truly are, but who we want them to be. That's why it felt so deep, because it wasn't just about her. It was about you, your unspoken desire to be the hero, the protector, the one who finally makes sense of her chaos. You mistook emotional dependence for intimacy. You confused her fragility with emotional depth. Her need for rescue looked like love, but it wasn't. It was survival. And you, in your own blindness, played along not out of weakness, but out of longing. You needed to feel essential. You wanted to matter. And in that wanting, you ignored the signs, the deflection of responsibility, the emotional spirals, the fear of reality masked as freedom. You didn't just project a fantasy onto her. You built your identity around it. But fantasies, no matter how beautiful, eventually collapse under the weight of truth. And when that happens, you're left holding not a soulmate, but a shadow. One you cast yourself. There's a cost to living in illusion, and it's always paid in silence. At first, you barely notice it. You make small compromises. You brush things off. You convince yourself that every relationship has its flaws, that her volatility is just passion, that her neediness is love. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to shrink. You speak less. You suppress your needs. You stop expecting reciprocity. Because every time you ask for balance, the storm comes. And rather than face conflict, you sacrifice yourself for the illusion of peace. But peace built on self-abandonment is not peace. It's slow erosion. And the longer you stay, the more you disappear. You stop leading. You start managing. You become the emotional anchor for someone who has no intention of ever becoming grounded. And the tragedy is, you think you're doing something noble. You think your patience is love, but really, you're vanishing. Jung warned us, whatever you do not bring into consciousness will return as fate. And this is what fate looks like: men drained, derailed, dismantled by women who never intended to grow. You weren't just heartbroken. You were emptied of energy, of focus, of self. And the worst part, she may never even know the damage she caused, because she wasn't trying to destroy you. She was simply surviving in the only way she knew how, by clinging to someone strong enough to carry her through a life she never intended to take responsibility for. Carl Jung didn't just describe the problem, he offered the path out. It's called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming psychologically whole. For men trapped in relationships with emotionally immature partners, this path isn't just healing, it's necessary. Because once you've carried someone else's chaos long enough, your soul starts begging for clarity. That ache you feel, that exhaustion in your bones. It's not weakness. It's the voice of your true self trying to rise. Individuation means drawing a bold line between what is yours and what never was. It means stepping out of her fantasy world and into reality, not her version of it, but yours. It means saying no more, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. You don't owe anyone your collapse. You don't exist to be someone's emotional infrastructure. The real awakening happens the moment you see the dynamic for what it is: not love, not fate, not soulmate energy, but psychological entanglement. And in that moment, you reclaim your freedom. You remember that you were not built to orbit around anyone. You were built to stand, to lead, to integrate your own shadow, not carry someone else's denial of theirs. This is the turning point, not when you fix her, not when she finally changes, but when you stop waiting and begin walking. Alone if you must, whole if you choose. That's not abandonment. That's the beginning of selfhood. The world has told men to be kind, to be patient, to be understanding. and those are virtues. But without clarity, they become traps. Because when you lack clarity, you confuse emotional chaos for passion. You mistake helplessness for vulnerability. You romanticize drama as depth. And worst of all, you convince yourself that being needed is the same as being loved. It's not. It never was. Carl Jung taught that a man who hasn't made peace with his inner feminine, his emotional world, his intuition, his softness, will forever be manipulated by it in others. That's the tragic irony. The very part of yourself you avoid becomes the magnet that draws you into destructive dynamics. You think you're choosing her, but really, you're chasing the missing pieces of yourself through someone who doesn't have them either. Clarity isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming honest. It's about seeing things as they are, not as your projections, your longings, or your wounds have painted them. A clear man doesn't fall for chaos disguised as chemistry. He doesn't get lost in the illusion that his worth is tied to his ability to rescue. He knows that real love doesn't ask him to sacrifice his peace. Reclaiming your masculine clarity means reclaiming your vision, the one that sees patterns before they repeat, that recognizes when you're being pulled into someone else's unresolved story. It's not bitterness. It's not detachment. It's truth. And it's the only thing that can free you. Because once you see clearly, you stop playing roles that were never yours to begin with and start living as the man you were always meant to become. You've been told that femininity is softness, that it's sweetness, beauty, grace, and a gentle spirit. But that's only a fragment of the truth, the part that flatters, the part that sells. What no one tells you is that true feminine energy, mature, integrated, feminine energy is fierce, grounded, focused, and deeply rooted in self-awareness. She doesn't need to be rescued. She doesn't thrive on chaos. She creates, she holds, she leads in her own right. The Puella Eterna doesn't embody this. She lives in the mask, the charm, the allure, the performance of womanhood without the substance. She may look the part, speak the language, even mimic the emotions. But behind the curtain, there is no structure, no shadow work, no responsibility. She's praised for her lightness, her spontaneity, her refusal to be tied down. But what you're really witnessing is someone running from adulthood, from consequence, from herself. And if you stay long enough, you'll feel it. She'll drain your mission, your focus, your clarity, not because she wants to harm you, but because she hasn't yet built anything solid within herself. And someone who hasn't anchored herself will always pull others into the drift. Recognizing mature feminine energy is not about looking for perfection. It's about recognizing a woman who has faced her darkness and come out stronger. A woman who doesn't just want love, she's ready to carry it. She doesn't need you to be her savior. She meets you in the middle, not to be completed, but to co-create. That's not just attraction, that's alignment. And it's the only kind of partnership that doesn't cost you your soul. She didn't choose to be this way, not entirely. From the time she was a little girl, the world shaped her, rewarded her for being beautiful, not brave, celebrated her for being agreeable, not assertive, taught her to be pleasing, accommodating, light, and soft, but never to be responsible, grounded, or whole. She learned that her value was in how she made others feel, not in who she truly was. And so over time, she built a life around performance one, where being adored mattered more than being known. Meanwhile, boys were told to be strong, stoic, resilient, and most of all useful. They were taught to carry, to solve, to protect. But no one gave them a compass for emotional truth. No one explained what to do when the women they loved refused to grow, when sweetness masked dependency, when chaos wore the mask of charm. This cultural split is why so many men and women collide instead of connect. She was trained to attract provision. He was trained to give it often at the cost of his soul. And in that unspoken transaction, neither person ever truly matures. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He knew that individuation, true psychological wholeness, is impossible as long as we cling to roles handed to us by society. Growth begins the moment we stop acting and start integrating. It begins when a man stops chasing beauty and begins seeking depth. When a woman stops hiding behind softness and starts stepping into substance. Only then can a relationship move from survival to sacred. Only then does love become real. It always begins the same way. You meet her, she's magnetic, unpredictable, intoxicating. She makes you feel alive, needed, like a man. But eventually, the same patterns emerge. The avoidance of hard truths, the emotional volatility, the inability to face discomfort without turning it into drama. You tell yourself, this time will be different. But it isn't. Because the truth is nothing changes until you do. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious will rule your life until you make it conscious, and this is what he meant. If you don't see the Puella for what she is, you'll keep circling back to her over and over wearing different names and faces. You'll call it chemistry, fate, even love, but it's a pattern, a loop, a lesson you haven't yet learned. Breaking the cycle starts with radical honesty, not about her, but about you. Why are you drawn to what drains you? Why do you mistake instability for excitement? Why do you keep sacrificing your clarity just to feel needed? When you stop asking, why is she like this, and start asking, why do I keep choosing this? The cycle begins to crack. It's not your job to fix her. Your work is to wake up to see clearly, to set boundaries, to finally walk away from what is beautiful but broken. And when you do, you don't just break the pattern for yourself. You break it for every version of you that stayed too long, loved too hard, and lost too much. That is the beginning of freedom, and it's yours to claim. You were never meant to be her therapist, or her emotional life jacket, or the stable ground beneath her feet while she floats through life without ever planting roots. That is not love, that is self-betrayal in the name of loyalty. And yet that's what so many men have been taught, that to be a good man is to absorb her chaos, to be her calm, to carry her through the storms she keeps recreating. But Carl Jung saw through that illusion. He taught that a man's purpose isn't to rescue others from their unconscious, it's to master his own. You were built to lead, not in the domineering sense, but to lead yourself, to hold steady in truth, to remain clear in chaos, to walk away from what demands you become less in order to be loved. That is masculine maturity, not the pursuit of control, but the embodiment of presence. And presence demands boundaries. Too many men have sacrificed their mission for emotional rescue operations. They've traded vision for validation. And in doing so, they've become shadows of who they were meant to be. Your real purpose was never to orbit around someone else's story. It was to write your own, with clarity, with courage, with conviction. Because when a man reclaims his center, when he stops chasing potential and starts living in purpose, something shifts. He no longer gets pulled into the tides of immaturity. He stands rooted. And only from that place can he truly discern who is worthy to walk beside him. Not someone who needs saving, but someone who is already rising. Healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with seeing clearly, with looking at what you've tolerated and admitting, I betrayed myself to keep the peace. That kind of clarity is brutal, but it's also sacred, because you can't grow from what you continue to excuse. You can't evolve while pretending the emotional weight you've been carrying was love. It wasn't. It was survival. And you were never meant to survive in your own relationship, you were meant to thrive. Carl Jung didn't just write about patterns, he gave us the map out of them. The process of individuation, the integration of all the fragmented parts of the self, is how men reclaim their power after years spent as emotional anchors for women who refuse to stand on their own. Healing isn't passive, it's active. It's a conscious decision to no longer participate in dynamics that deplete you. Growth happens the moment you choose to stop rescuing and start remembering who you were before the exhaustion. It happens when you reclaim your voice, your boundaries, your vision. And from that place, the place of healed masculinity, everything changes. You no longer chase chaos. You no longer confuse emotional neediness for connection. You stop mistaking being needed for being loved. You become whole. And when wholeness meets wholeness, that's when real love, mature, grounded, reciprocal love can finally begin. Not from fantasy, not from performance, but from truth. And that truth will never require you to abandon yourself again. This isn't just a story. This is a wake-up call. A mirror held to the soul of every man who has ever lost himself in the name of love. If you've been through it, if you felt the weight of carrying someone who refused to walk the slow erosion of your identity as you tried to be everything for someone who offered nothing stable in return, then you already know this truth in your bones. You can't save someone who doesn't want to grow. But now that you know you're out of excuses, you can no longer pretend that her beauty justifies your pain, that her neediness means love, that your role is to be her emotional home while she refuses to build one within herself. That's not love, that's spiritual exhaustion disguised as nobility. Jung taught that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot become that man while orbiting around someone who hasn't become herself. The work begins with you, with confronting your projections, with breaking the cycles, with reclaiming your focus, your mission, your emotional clarity. You weren't built to rescue. You were built to lead, to see clearly, to choose wisely. And when you finally do, you'll stop giving your energy to women who drain you and start building a life so whole, so rooted, that only someone truly grown can meet you there. This is your turning point. Not in bitterness, not in blame, but in truth. It's time to stop living in confusion and start walking in clarity. For yourself, for your future, for the man you were always meant to be. The deeper message of this entire narrative is simple, yet powerful. Emotional clarity is not just a personal virtue, it's a survival skill. In a culture that rewards appearance over depth, charm over character, and comfort over growth, many men are unknowingly seduced into emotional entanglements that drain their energy and derail their purpose. The lesson is not to resent these experiences, but to wake up from them. Carl Jung's teachings remind us that healing starts with seeing, with becoming conscious of our own patterns, projections, and unconscious cravings for validation. If you keep attracting partners who destabilize you, the question isn't what's wrong with them. It's what unresolved part of me is drawn to this. In practical life, this means learning to set boundaries without guilt. It means recognizing when you're being emotionally manipulated, even subtly, and choosing truth over fantasy. It means not mistaking chaos for passion or rescue missions for love. True connection happens only between two whole, mature people, not between a savior and a childlike partner. For American men in particular, raised in a culture that emphasizes achievement but neglects emotional intelligence, this message is vital. You can't lead others until you've learned to lead yourself. And self-leadership begins the moment you stop running from your own soul and start reclaiming it.